Hello, soul-igniting story fam. Buckle up because today's tale is packed with sweetness and swoon-worthy magic. Let's jump straight into the story. What if I told you that the person you just humiliated and threw out of your home was the one person who loved you most in this world? Have you ever made a decision in anger that you'd give anything to take back? Have you ever wondered about the stories of the people who clean your offices, serve your food, or work invisibly around you? Every day, we pass by countless faces: the janitor emptying our trash, the waitress refilling our coffee, the cleaning lady dusting our shelves. We see them, but do we really see them? This is the story of Dominic Langston, a man who built a billion-dollar empire but was about to discover that his greatest fortune was standing right in front of him, wearing a maid's uniform. But how could a tech billionaire not recognize his own mother? And what happens when 30 years of separation collides with one moment of cruel indifference? The Garden District in New Orleans has always been where power lives. Massive oak trees line streets filled with mansions that have witnessed generations of wealth, secrets, and hidden truths. On this particular evening in late September, one of these grand homes buzzed with the energy of a charity gala. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across marble floors, while New Orleans' elite mingled beneath painted ceilings that had watched over the city's social hierarchy for decades. Dominic Langston moved through his own party, like a king surveying his kingdom. At 42, he commanded every room he entered. His tech company had revolutionized data security, making him one of the youngest billionaires in Louisiana. Tonight's event would raise millions for children's education, a cause close to his heart for reasons he couldn't quite explain. Mr. Langston, the senator wants to discuss the new legislation, his assistant whispered as Dominic adjusted his Armani cufflinks. 5 minutes, Dominic replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having every word treated as law. His dark eyes scanned the crowd, calculating, assessing, always working 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Meanwhile, in the shadows of this glittering world, Harriet Boone worked with the quiet dignity of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of being invisible. At 68, her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she cleared empty champagne glasses and replaced used napkins. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly, her uniform pressed and spotless despite hours of service. Harriet had worked events like this for nearly a decade, moving through New Orleans' wealthiest homes like a ghost. She knew which families tipped well, which ones barely acknowledged her existence, and which ones treated their help with basic human respect. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight, she was working in the home of Dominic Langston. She had watched him from across the room all evening, her heart beating with a rhythm she hadn't felt in 30 years. The way he held his shoulders, the gesture he made when deep in thought, the laugh that escaped when he thought no one was looking. Every detail sent recognition flooding through her like electricity. The guests grew louder as the evening progressed, their conversations flowing as freely as the expensive wine. Harriet navigated between clusters of designers' gowns and tailored tuxedos, careful not to interrupt the important discussions about politics, business deals, and social standings. She was balancing a full tray of crystal glasses when it happened. A prominent judge stepped backward at exactly the wrong moment, bumping into Harriet just as she rounded the corner near the grand staircase. Time slowed as 12 antique champagne flutes crashed to the marble floor in an explosion of glass and golden liquid. The entire room fell silent. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward the sound. The clatter echoed through the mansion like a gunshot, and Harriet stood frozen at the center of it all, surrounded by the glittering wreckage of her mistake. Dominic Langston's face went cold as stone. If you ever felt invisible or wondered about hidden family secrets, you need to hear this story. Hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever discovered something that completely changed how you saw someone? The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. 200 of New Orleans' most influential people stood frozen, their conversations abandoned as they stared at the mess of shattered crystal and spilled champagne spreading across Dominic's pristine marble floor. Harriet's hands trembled as she looked down at the destruction around her feet. Golden liquid seeped between cracks in the ancient stone, and fragments of what had once been priceless antique glasses caught the light like scattered diamonds. Her throat tightened as she realized the magnitude of what had just happened. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the cavernous room. "I'm so very sorry. Dominic Langston's jaw clenched as he surveyed the damage. These weren't just any glasses. They were baccarat crystal, each piece worth more than most people made in a month. But it wasn't the money that ignited the fury building in his chest. It was the embarrassment, the disruption, the fact that his perfectly orchestrated evening had been shattered by what he saw as carelessness. "Unbelievable," he muttered, his voice low, but carrying clearly in the hushed room. His dark eyes blazed as he strode toward Harriet, his expensive shoes crunching on broken glass. "This is exactly the kind of incompetence I refuse to tolerate." Harriet began to kneel, reaching for the larger pieces of glass, with shaking hands. "Please, sir, let me clean this up. I can fix. Don't touch anything else." Dominic's voice cracked like a whip, stopping her mid-motion. "You've done enough damage for one evening." The guests shifted uncomfortably. Senator Morrison cleared his throat and looked away. Mrs. Beauregard, the mayor's wife, whispered something to her companion behind her jewel fan. The room buzzed with the kind of uncomfortable energy that comes when wealthy people witness someone else's humiliation. Dominic's business partner, James, stepped forward cautiously. "Dom, maybe we should just—" "No." Dominic's words sliced through the air. He focused entirely on Harriet, who remained crouched among the glass fragments, her silver hair catching the light from the chandelier above. "Do you have any idea what you just destroyed? Those glasses belonged to my adoptive grandmother. They were irreplaceable." Harriet's heart broke a little more with each word. She had spent the entire evening watching this man, her son, command rooms, charm donors, and build connections that would benefit thousands of children. She had been so proud, even from her invisible position in the margins. Now she knelt before him as he unleashed his anger on her like a stranger. "I understand, Mr. Langston," she said quietly, her dignity intact despite her position on the floor. "I take full responsibility, whatever the cost." "The cost?" Dominic laughed bitterly. "You think this is about money? This is about respect, about doing your job properly, about not embarrassing me in front of the most important people in this city." His words hit her like physical blows. Harriet had faced poverty, discrimination, and decades of heartbreak, but nothing had prepared her for the pain of being berated by the child she had given birth to, the baby she had held for exactly 3 hours before signing the papers that would give him a better life. "Security," Dominic called out, his voice echoing through the mansion. "I want her escorted out immediately." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Even by New Orleans high society standards, this was harsh. Several guests exchanged worried glances. This wasn't just about broken glasses anymore. This was about how power treated powerlessness, and everyone in the room could feel the uncomfortable truth of that dynamic. 2 security guards appeared as if from nowhere, their faces professionally neutral. "Mr. Langston?" "Remove her from my property," Dominic commanded, not even looking at Harriet anymore. "I don't want to see her face again. Ever." Harriet slowly rose to her feet, careful not to cut herself on the glass. She reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a small, worn envelope, her final paycheck from the catering company. With trembling fingers, she placed it on a nearby table. "I won't be needing this," she said with quiet dignity. "I'm sorry for disrupting your beautiful evening." As the security guards flanked her, Harriet looked one last time at Dominic. For just a moment, their eyes met across the wreckage of crystal and spilled champagne. In that instant, she saw something flicker in his expression, a shadow of uncertainty, perhaps even recognition, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "This way, ma'am," one of the guards said gently, taking her elbow with surprising kindness. Harriet walked through the crowd with her head held high. Every step toward the massive front doors felt like walking away from her heart. She had found him after 30 years of searching, worked in his home, watched him succeed beyond her wildest dreams. And now she was being thrown out like garbage. The heavy doors closed behind her with a final, definitive thud. Inside, the party slowly resumed. Conversations picked up cautiously. Staff members quickly cleaned up the glass, and Dominic returned to his networking with forced normalcy. But something had shifted in the room's energy. Several guests seemed less enthusiastic, their smiles a bit more strained. But here's what nobody in that room knew. including Dominic himself, about the woman who had just been humiliated and discarded like she meant nothing. This is already getting intense, isn't it? Subscribe and ring that notification bell, because this story is about to take turns you never saw coming. Harriet Boone sat in her small apartment that night, still wearing her uniform, staring at a photograph she hadn't looked at in years. Her weathered hands held the only picture she had from 1957, a young, scared 17-year-old girl with hopeful eyes, standing outside a clinic in rural Louisiana, her belly round with a child who would become Dominic Langston. To understand tonight's heartbreak, you need to know Harriet's story. You need to understand the choice that haunted her for 30 years, and why seeing her son throw her out of his mansion felt like dying twice. It was 1957 in Opelousas, Louisiana, a time when being an unwed black teenager with no family support meant facing a world that had no place for you. Harriet's parents had died in a car accident when she was 15, leaving her to live with an elderly aunt who could barely afford to feed herself, let alone a growing girl. When Harriet discovered she was pregnant, the father, a 19-year-old boy named Marcus who worked at the local lumber mill, disappeared the moment she told him the news. One day he was promising her marriage and a future together. The next day his supervisor told her he'd taken a job up north and left no forwarding address. "You're on your own now, child," her aunt told her bluntly. "I can't handle a baby crying all night and another mouth to feed. You need to figure this out." Harriet spent sleepless nights holding her growing belly, whispering promises to the child inside her. "I'm going to love you so much," she would say. "I'm going to find a way to give you everything I never had." But love wasn't enough to put food on the table or a roof over their heads. Harriet worked cleaning houses for white families during her pregnancy, earning barely enough to survive. The ladies she worked for pretended not to notice her condition, and she pretended not to hear their whispered conversations about that poor girl and what a shame. As her pregnancy progressed, the harsh reality became impossible to ignore. She had no money saved, no place to live once the baby came, no job that would allow her to work with an infant. The local church offered prayers but no practical help. The social services office treated her like a problem to be solved rather than a person in need. Dr. Williams, the only black doctor in town, was the one who finally spoke the words out loud that Harriet had been thinking for months. "Honey," he said gently after one of her prenatal visits, "you need to consider what's best for this baby. There are good families out there, families with means who can't have children of their own. You want me to give up my baby?" Harriet's voice broke on the words. "I want you to give your baby a chance," Dr. Williams replied. "A chance at education, opportunities, a stable home. Sometimes loving someone means wanting better for them than you can provide." Harriet cried herself to sleep for weeks, her hands constantly moving over her belly, tore between a mother's instinct to keep her child close and a mother's desire to give that child the best possible life. She researched the families Dr. Williams mentioned, successful people, educated people, people who could provide opportunities she could never dream of offering. There was one couple that stood out, Margaret and Robert Langston. He was a successful businessman. She was a former teacher who couldn't have children. They lived in New Orleans, owned a beautiful home, and had already begun setting aside money for their future child's education. In their letter to Dr. Williams, they wrote about wanting to give a child every advantage and all the love we have to offer. On a cold February morning in 1958, Harriet went into labor at the small clinic outside town. She held her son for exactly 3 hours, long enough to memorize every detail of his perfect face, to whisper all the things she wanted him to know, to name him Samuel after her father. "You're going to do great things, Samuel," she whispered as tears fell onto his tiny hands. "You're going to have opportunities one could never give you. You're going to be loved and safe and educated. But know this, your mama loved you first and most." The adoption papers were already prepared. Harriet signed them with shaking hands, each letter of her signature feeling like she was signing away pieces of her heart. The Langstons were waiting in New Orleans, having already prepared a nursery and chosen the name Dominic. Can I give him something?" Harriet asked Dr. Williams through her tears. From her worn purse, she pulled out a small hospital bracelet that read, "Baby boy Boone," and the date of his birth. "When he's old enough, Will you make sure he knows his mama wanted him to have this? Dr. Williams promised, but in the chaos of rushed paperwork and emotional goodbyes, the bracelet was forgotten, left behind in a manila envelope with other personal effects that were never forwarded to the adoptive family. Harriet left Louisiana 3 days later with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. She headed to New Orleans, drawn by some inexplicable need to be in the same city as her son, even if she could never see him. For 30 years, she built a quiet life in the shadows of New Orleans society. She worked for wealthy families, always hoping, always watching for a face that might remind her of the baby she held for 3 precious hours. She kept that hospital bracelet in a small wooden box, along with the one photograph from her pregnancy and a lock of her own hair that she cut the day she gave birth. When Dominic Langston's name started appearing in business magazines and technology articles, Harriet felt her heart recognize him long before her mind did. The shape of his hand when he gestured, the way he tilted his head when thinking, the laugh that escaped when he forgot to be serious. Every detail screamed Samuel to a mother who had never stopped looking. She began taking jobs at events where he might appear, telling herself she just wanted to see him from afar, to know he was healthy and successful and happy. When the opportunity came to work his charity gala, she couldn't resist. For hours tonight, she had watched her son command the room with confidence and intelligence. She saw him charm donors into giving more money for children's education, watched him light up when talking about providing opportunities for underprivileged kids. Her heart swelled with pride at the man he'd become, the man who just threw her out of his house like she was nothing. Sitting in her apartment now, Harriet opened a small wooden box and pulled out that tiny hospital bracelet. Baby boy Boone. It still read, the ink faded but legible. She closed her eyes and remembered the weight of him in her arms, the smell of his skin, the way his tiny fingers wrapped around hers. I gave you away so you could have everything, she whispered to the photograph on her table. I never wanted you to know struggle or want or rejection. But God help me, Samuel, I never stopped being your mother. Outside her window, New Orleans hummed with its usual nighttime energy. Somewhere across town, in his mansion in the Garden District, her son was probably already forgetting about the maid who disrupted his party. But Harry would remember every moment of this night for the rest of her life. The night she stood so close to her child that she could have reached out and touched him, and he looked at her like she was invisible. Have you ever sacrificed something precious, hoping it would lead to something better? Let me know in the comments what you think about Harriet's impossible choice all those years ago. 2 miles across town from Harriet's small apartment, Dominic Langston stood in his empty mansion, loosening his bow tie as the last of the catering staff finished cleaning up the evening's wreckage. The party had ended hours ago, but sleep felt impossible. Something about tonight's incident with the maid gnawed at him in ways he couldn't understand. He poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking his perfectly manicured gardens. The irony wasn't lost on him. He owned one of the most beautiful homes in New Orleans, yet he'd never felt more alone. To understand why Dominic reacted so harshly tonight, you need to understand the man behind a billion-dollar empire. You need to know about the abandoned baby who grew up building walls instead of relationships, and how success became both his greatest achievement and his most isolating prison. Baby Dominic Langston had arrived at the home of Margaret and Robert Langston on a cold February day in 1958, carried by a social worker who promised he was a good baby, quiet and alert. Margaret fell in love with him instantly, cradling him against her chest and whispering promises about the wonderful life they would build together. For 4 precious years, Dominic knew what it felt like to be completely loved. Margaret read to him every night. Robert taught him to ride a bicycle in their backyard, and their home was filled with laughter, music, and the kind of security that comes from being someone's whole world. But happiness, Dominic learned early, was fragile. Margaret died of cancer when he was 4 years old. Robert, devastated by the loss of his beloved wife, struggled to care for a grieving preschooler while managing his own overwhelming grief. Within 6 months, Dominic found himself in the Louisiana foster care system. Not because Robert didn't love him, but because a broken man couldn't figure out how to be a father alone. It's temporary, Robert promised as he hugged Dominic goodbye at the first foster home. Just until Daddy can figure things out. but temporarily stretched into months, then years. Robert visited less and less frequently, his own depression and alcohol use making him an unreliable presence in Dominic's life. Eventually, the visits stopped altogether, leaving Dominic to wonder what he'd done wrong to make his father disappear. The foster care system of the 1960s wasn't equipped to handle a smart, grieving child who asked too many questions about why his parents had left him. Dominic bounced between homes, some loving but overwhelmed, others simply collecting state checks for housing children they saw as burdens. At the Johnson house, he learned that showing emotion made you weak. Mrs. Johnson had 6 foster kids and no patience for crying and carrying on. Dominic quickly adapted, burying his feelings so deep that even he forgot they existed. At the Williams house, he discovered that being smart could be dangerous. Mr. Williams felt threatened by a 10-year-old who read at a high school level and asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. "Don't get too big for your britches, boy," became a phrase Dominic heard daily. By age 12, Dominic had developed a survival strategy that would define the rest of his life. Trust no one completely, depend only on yourself, and never let anyone see you vulnerable. He threw himself into schoolwork with obsessive focus, understanding instinctively that education was his ticket out of the system. The nightmares started around this time, dreams of a woman's voice singing lullabies, the smell of something sweet baking in a kitchen he couldn't quite remember, the feeling of being held by someone who loved him unconditionally. He would wake up reaching for someone that wasn't there, a longing so deep it felt like drowning. "It's probably memories of your birth mother," suggested Dr. Patterson, the school counselor who noticed Dominic's academic excellence masking profound emotional isolation. Sometimes our earliest experiences leave impressions we can't fully recall. But Dominic rejected that explanation. His birth mother had abandoned him, just like his adoptive father had. Why would he dream about someone who hadn't wanted him enough to keep him? High school became Dominic's battlefield and his salvation. He earned perfect grades not because learning came easily, but because failure wasn't an option. Every A was proof he was worth something. Every academic achievement was armor against a world that had taught him people leave. His senior year, he received a full scholarship to Tulane University, studying computer science and business with the same obsessive focus he'd applied to survival. While other students made friends and dated, Dominic worked part-time jobs and studied, building his future brick by brick with no help from anyone. The tech revolution of the 1990s was tailor-made for someone like Dominic, brilliant, driven, and comfortable working alone. His data security company started in a garage became worth millions within 5 years. By 30, he was worth hundreds of millions. By 40, he had achieved billionaire status. But success couldn't fill the hollow spaces in his chest. Dominic had employees, business partners, and social connections, but no real friends. He'd had relationships with women, but never let anyone close enough to truly know him. The walls he'd built as a foster child had become the foundation of his adult life. The mansion in the Garden District wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. Every perfect room was designed to impress, to demonstrate his worth to a world that had once discarded him. The charity galas and business dinners weren't just social obligations. They were proof that the abandoned baby had become someone important. Yet late at night, when the house was empty and the business deals were done, Dominic still heard that woman's voice from his dreams. He still caught himself looking for something he couldn't name in crowds of strangers. 3 years ago, he'd finally hired a private investigator to research his biological parents. The records from that era are incomplete, the investigator had reported. Private adoptions, especially involving unwed mothers, often left gaps in documentation. "I can keep trying, but it may be impossible to find concrete information." Dominic paid the man to keep searching anyway, not because he wanted a reunion, but because he needed answers. He needed to understand where his drive came from, why he could never seem to rest, why success felt hollow when he'd worked so hard to achieve it. Standing at his window tonight, swirling bourbon in a crystal glass, Dominic replayed the evening's incident with the maid. Something about her dignified response to his anger had unsettled him. Most people cowered when he unleashed his temper, but she had faced him with a quiet strength that reminded him of... He couldn't finish the thought. Reminded him of what? Of whom? The woman's face flickered in his memory. Silver hair, dark eyes that seemed to hold decades of stories, hands that moved with practiced grace despite her obvious distress. For just a moment during their confrontation, he'd felt the strangest sensation, like recognition without understanding. Dominic dismissed the feeling as his imagination, stress from work, too much wine at dinner, the emotional weight of hosting another charity event focused on giving children the opportunities he'd fought to create for himself. But as he finally headed upstairs to bed, that investigator's business card on his desk seemed to call out to him. Maybe it was time to push harder for answers. Maybe after 30 years of questions, he was finally ready for the truth about where he came from. He had no idea that the truth had just spent the evening serving champagne at his party, or that she was sitting 2 miles away, holding a hospital bracelet with his birth name on it, crying for the son she'd given away to give him the exact life he'd built. For days after humiliating the maid at his charity gala, Dominic Langston couldn't shake the memory of her face. He'd thrown people out of events before, disruptive guests, uninvited journalists, business rivals tried to cause scenes. But something about this woman's dignified response haunted him in ways he couldn't explain. The private investigator's business card sat on his mahogany desk like an accusation. Thomas Chun had been searching for Dominic's biological parents for 3 years with minimal success. The adoption records from 1958 were frustratingly incomplete, and most of the people involved in the process had died decades ago. But Dominic's restlessness had reached a breaking point. The recurring dreams of a woman's voice, the inexplicable longing that success couldn't fill, the growing sense that understanding his past was a key to finding peace. All of it crystallized into an urgent need for answers. He picked up his phone and dialed Chen's number. "Mr. Langston," Chen answered on the second ring. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. Have you reconsidered my suggestion about expanding the search parameters?" "Do it," Dominic said without preamble. "Whatever it costs, whatever resources you need. I want answers, and I want them now." "That's excellent news. I've actually been in contact with Detective Simone Caldwell at NOPD. She specializes in cold case family reunifications and has access to databases I can't reach. With your permission, I'd like to bring her into the case officially." 2 days later, Dominic found himself in an unusual position, waiting. Detective Caldwell had requested a week to cross-reference information across multiple state databases, hospital records, and adoption agencies that had operated in Louisiana during the 1950s. For a man accustomed to demanding immediate results, the delay felt excruciating. He threw himself into work with even more intensity than usual, staying at the office until midnight, scheduling back-to-back meetings. Anything to keep his mind occupied. But every quiet moment brought back the same haunting questions. Who was his birth mother? Why had she given him up? Was she still alive? On Thursday morning, his assistant knocked on his office door with unusual hesitancy. "Mr. Langston? Detective Caldwell is here. She says it's urgent." Detective Caldwell entered his office, carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of someone about to deliver life-changing news. At 52, she had the steady presence of someone who had guided families through countless emotional reunions. But something about her demeanor suggested this case was different. "Mr. Langston, please sit down," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "You found something." "I found everything." Detective Caldwell opened her folder and spread several documents across his desk. "Your birth name was Samuel Boone. You were born February 14th, 1958, at a clinic outside Opelousas, Louisiana. Your birth mother was Harriet Boone, 17 years old, unmarried." Dominic stared at the birth certificate, seeing his own birthday next to a name that meant nothing to him. "Samuel Boone," he repeated quietly. "The adoption was handled privately by Dr. Williams, a local physician who arranged placements for unwed mothers. Your birth mother specifically requested that you be placed with an educated family who could provide opportunities she couldn't offer. What happened to her? Is she—" "She's alive, Mr. Langston. She's 68 years old, and she lives here in New Orleans." The words hit Dominic like a physical blow. His birth mother wasn't some distant memory or tragic figure from the past. She was here, in his city, breathing the same air, walking the same streets. For 30 years, Detective Caldwell continued. Harriet Boone has been searching for the son she gave up. She's contacted our department multiple times asking for help. She's taken jobs throughout the city, hoping she might somehow encounter you. Dominic's throat went dry. What kind of jobs? Domestic work, cleaning houses, catering events, anything that might put her in contact with successful families. She told one of our officers that she hoped if she worked around wealthy people long enough, she might recognize something of herself in their world. The office felt like it was spinning. Dominic gripped the arms of his chair as memories from the charity gala crashed over him. The maid's silver hair, her quiet dignity even as he berated her, the strange moment of almost recognition when their eyes met. Detective, his voice was barely audible. What does she look like? About 5'4", silver gray hair, usually worn pulled back. She's described as having a dignified bearing despite working in service positions. Oh, God! Dominic buried his face in his hands. Oh, my God! I think I've met her. Detective Caldwell leaned forward, her professional calm flickering with concern. Where? When? For days ago, at my charity gala, there was a woman, a maid working the event. She accidentally broke some glasses and I lost my temper. I had her thrown out. I humiliated her in front of 200 people. The detective was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Mr. Langston, if that woman was Harriet Boone, then she's been carrying the weight of that encounter while knowing you were her son. The full horror of what he'd done settled over Dominic like a suffocating blanket. His birth mother had found him, had worked this event hoping to catch a glimpse of the successful life she'd given him, and he had treated her with casual cruelty. I need to see her, he said suddenly. I need to apologize. I need to... Mr. Langston, Detective Caldwell interrupted gently. Family reunifications are delicate situations. There are protocols to follow, careful approaches that protect both parties emotionally. Protocols? Dominic's voice rose. I threw my own mother out of my house. I treated her like garbage while she was probably dying inside, knowing who I was and seeing what I'd become. Which is exactly why we need to handle this carefully. Your birth mother has carried this secret for 30 years. She's made peace with her decision to give you up, but that doesn't mean she's prepared for the emotional complexity of a reunion. Detective Caldwell pulled out another document. Before we proceed, I need you to consider something. Harriet Boone made an enormous sacrifice, hoping you would have a better life than she could provide. From her perspective, watching you succeed beyond her wildest dreams was probably both heartbreaking and wonderful. The fact that you were cruel to her that night doesn't erase 30 years of love and hope. Dominic stared at his birth certificate. Try to reconcile the name Samuel Boone with the man he'd become. How do we fix this? How do I even begin to apologize for something unforgivable? We start with honesty, Detective Caldwell replied. We arrange a control meeting where both of you can speak your truth. But first, are you absolutely certain you're ready for this? Once we open this door, there's no closing it again. Dominic thought about the recurring dreams, the inexplicable emptiness that success couldn't fill, the woman's face that had haunted him for 4 days. I've been ready my whole life. I just didn't know what I was getting ready for. Then let's bring your mother home, Mr. Langston. As Detective Caldwell gathered her files, Dominic walked his office window and looked out over New Orleans. Somewhere in this city, Harriet Boone was probably working another job, carrying the memory of her son's cruelty while still hoping for a miracle she didn't know was about to arrive. The boy who had dreamed of finding his mother was about to become the man who had to earn her forgiveness. Detective Caldwell spent 2 days carefully orchestrating what she knew would be one of the most emotionally charged moments of her career. She had handled dozens of family reunifications, but never one where the first meeting between mother and son had involved public humiliation and heartbreak. The plan was simple in theory, complex in execution. Harriet would return to Dominic's mansion under the pretense of retrieving a forgotten item from the night of the gala. Detective Caldwell had confirmed that Harriet had indeed left a small personal belonging, an old leather purse, in the staff area during her hasty exit. It would give her a legitimate reason to return and give Dominic a chance to see her face again before the truth was revealed. Mr. Langston, Detective Caldwell called that Friday afternoon. She's agreed to come by this evening around 6 o'clock. Are you prepared for this? Dominic had spent the past 2 days in a state of emotional chaos. He'd canceled meetings, ignored phone calls, and walked the halls of his mansion trying to process what he was about to face. Every mirror seemed to reflect the face of a man who had become everything his birth mother had hoped for: successful, educated, powerful, and everything she probably feared he might become: cold, cruel, disconnected from basic human compassion. As prepared as someone could be for something like this, he replied, his voice hoarse from sleepless nights. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Dominic's housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, walked toward the front door, but he stopped her with a raised hand. I'll answer it. His legs felt unsteady as he crossed a marble foyer where, just a week ago, champagne glasses had shattered and changed everything. Through the heavy wooden door's glass panels, he could see a slight figure standing on his front steps, clutching a worn handbag, and looking up at the mansion with the same mixture of awe and sadness he remembered from that terrible night. Dominic opened the door. Harriet Boone stood before him in a simple blue dress, her silver hair neatly styled, her dark eyes holding decades of stories he was only beginning to understand. She looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile, but her posture still carried the quiet dignity that had struck him so forcefully during their first encounter. Mr. Langston, she said softly, I'm so sorry to bother you again. I believe I left my purse here last week, and there's something inside that's very important to me. Her voice, the voice from his dreams, the lullabies he couldn't quite remember, the comfort he'd been searching for his entire life without knowing what he was looking for. Please, Dominic managed, stepping aside. Come in. Harriet hesitated on the threshold, clearly remembering the last time she crossed this doorway. I don't want to impose. If someone could just check the staff area. Mrs. Boone. The name felt foreign and familiar at the same time on his lips. Please come in. I need to speak with you. Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. For a moment, their eyes met with the same almost recognition that had flickered between them a week ago, but now Dominic didn't dismiss the feeling. He held her gaze, searching her face for the features he saw in his own mirror every morning. They walked to his study in silence, passing the spot where the glasses had broken. Harriet's purse was indeed there, sitting on a small table where the catering staff had placed forgotten items. But when she reached for it, Dominic spoke. I know who you are. Harriet's hand froze inches from her purse. Her entire body went rigid, and for a moment, Dominic thought she might faint. I don't understand, she whispered. Dominic moved to his desk and picked up the folder Detective Caldwell had left with him. Harriet Boone, age 17, gave birth to a son on February 14, 1958, at a clinic outside Opelousas, Louisiana. She named him Samuel before giving him up for adoption to a family in New Orleans. Harriet's legs gave out, and she sank into the nearest chair. Her hands trembled as she stared at Dominic, her eyes filling with 30 years' worth of tears she'd been holding back. Samuel, she breathed, the name a prayer and a sob at the same time. My adoptive parents changed my name to Dominic. He knelt down in front of her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. But you call me Samuel. Samuel David, she whispered, her voice breaking. I gave you my father's name for your middle name, hoping you'd carry something of our family with you. The revelation hit Dominic like lightning. David. His middle name was David, and he'd never known why his adoptive parents had chosen it. All these years, he'd been carrying a piece of his birth family, without knowing it. You've been looking for me, he said, not a question but a statement of fact. Every day for 30 years. Tears streamed down Harriet's face as she reached out tentatively, then pulled her hand back, unsure she had the right to touch the son she'd given away. I would walk to the Garden District sometimes, wondering if you lived in one of these beautiful houses. I would read about successful young men in the newspaper, hoping one of them might be you. When I saw your name in society pages, when I learned about your company and your success, my heart knew before my mind would let me believe it. You took the catering job to see me. I just wanted to watch you from far away. I wanted to see that you were healthy and happy and everything I had dreamed you would become. Her voice cracked with fresh pain. I never intended for you to notice me. I certainly never intended to disrupt your beautiful evening." Dominic felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart until it stopped beating. "I treated you horribly. You didn't know. That doesn't excuse it." Dominic's voice was fierce with self-recrimination. "I humiliated my own mother in front of 200 people. I had you thrown out of my house like garbage. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, who sacrificed everything to give me opportunities, and I treated her with cruelty and contempt." Dominic. Samuel. The correction came out stronger than he'd intended. "My birth name is Samuel. The name you gave me. The name you whispered to me when I was 3 hours old." Harriet's eyes widened in surprise. "How did you know about the 3 hours?" Detective Caldwell found Dr. Williams' notes. "You held me for 3 hours before you signed the adoption papers." A sob escaped Harriet's throat as the memories flooded back. The way her baby in her arms, the smell of his skin, the way his tiny fingers had wrapped around hers as if he never wanted to let go. "I memorized everything about you in those 3 hours, she said through her tears. "Every eyelash, every breath, the little sound you made when you were dreaming. I wanted to carry those memories forever." "Why?" The question tore from Dominic's throat. "Why did you give me up?" Harriet looked at him with eyes full of love and loss. "Because I was 17, alone and penniless. Because you deserve better than a life of poverty and struggle. Because I loved you enough to want someone else to give you the world I couldn't provide. But you never stopped looking for me. A mother's heart doesn't know how to stop loving, even when love means letting go." She finally reached out and touched his face with trembling fingers. "Look at you. Look at what you've accomplished. You've exceeded every dream I had for you. I became successful," Dominic said bitterly, "but I also became the kind of man who could throw his own mother out of his house." "No." Harriet's voice was firm despite her tears. "You became a good man who had one bad moment. The fact that you're sitting here now, that you're crying, that you care about how you treated a maid you didn't even know, that tells me everything about who you really are." For the first time in 30 years, mother and son were in the same room, looking into each other's eyes, and seeing themselves reflected back. "Can you forgive me?" Dominic asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harriet smiled through her tears, the first real smile she'd allowed herself since the night of the gala. "Oh, my Samuel, I forgave you before you even asked." For the first time in 30 years, Harriet Boone held her son, not the baby she remembered from those precious 3 hours, but the man he had become, successful, powerful, and broken in ways she was only beginning to understand. They sat together on a leather couch in Dominic's study, her small hand dwarfed by his, as she traced the lines of his palm, like she was reading a map of all the years she'd missed. "Tell me about your dreams," she said softly. "Detective Caldwell mentioned you've been having dreams about a woman's voice." Dominic looked up in surprise. "How could you possibly know about that?" "Because I used to sing to you. Every night while you were growing inside me, I would put my hands on my belly and sing. After you were born, I sang to you for those 3 hours. The same song over and over." "What song?" Harriet's voice was barely above a whisper as she began to hum a melody that sent electricity through Dominic's entire body. It was a tune from his dreams, the lullaby that had haunted his sleep for decades, the comfort he'd been searching for without knowing what it was. "Summertime," she sang softly, "and the living is easy." Tears streamed down Dominic's face as memories that weren't quite memories flooded through him. The feeling of safety, of being completely loved, of a voice that meant home in ways he couldn't explain. "I dreamed about that song my entire childhood," he whispered. "Foster parents thought I was making it up. You weren't making it up, baby. That was me, loving you the only way I could." Harriet reached into the worn purse she'd come to retrieve and pulled out a small wooden box. "I brought something I thought you might want to see." Inside the box was a tiny hospital bracelet, yellow with age, that read, "Baby Boy Boone, February 14th, 1958. Beside it lay a black and white photograph of a young woman holding an infant, both of them illuminated by the soft light coming through a hospital window. "That's us," Harriet said, her voice thick with emotion. "The only picture I have of us together. Dominic stared at the photograph, seeing his own features reflected in the baby's face, recognizing something of himself in the exhausted but radiant 17-year-old girl cradling him. You were so young. Too young to be a mother, but old enough to love you completely. Harriet touched the edge of the photograph gently. I was terrified every moment of those 3 hours. Terrified of giving you up. Terrified of keeping you. Terrified I was making the wrong choice either way. Tell me about that day. Tell me everything. Harriet closed her eyes, traveling back through the decades to the most painful and beautiful day of her life. It was snowing when you were born. February in Louisiana hardly ever sees snow, but that day it was coming down like God was throwing a celebration. I took it as a sign that something special was happening. She described the small clinic, Dr. William's gentle hands, the way labor pains had mixed with heartbreak until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. She told him about the adoptive parents waiting in New Orleans, about the letters Margaret Langston had written promising to love someone else's baby like her own. What was my adoptive father like when he was young? Dominic asked. Before my mother died and he left me in the system? Oh, honey. Harriet's heart broke all over again as she learned about the foster care years. Dr. Williams told me Robert Langston was a good man who desperately wanted to be a father. I never knew about Margaret dying or about him not being able to care for you alone. If I had known, what would you have done? I would have found a way to bring you home. Somehow, some way, I would have figured it out. They talked through the evening and into the night. Harriet shared stories about her life after giving him up, the job she'd worked, the tiny apartment she'd lived in for decades, the way she'd saved every newspaper article that mentioned his company's success. She told him about the time she'd almost approached him at public events, about the nights she'd driven past his mansion wondering if he was happy. I was successful, Dominic admitted, but I wasn't happy. I was angry most of the time, angry at everyone who had left me, including you. You had every right to be angry. No, I didn't. Dominic's voice was firm. I had the right to be hurt, to feel abandoned, to grieve the childhood I didn't have. But I didn't have the right to become cruel. I didn't have the right to treat people the way I treated you that night. Harriet studied her son's face, seeing an internal battle between the successful businessman he'd become and the wounded boy he'd never stopped being. Success didn't make you cruel, Samuel. Success just gave you the power to express pain you've been carrying since childhood. The fact that you recognize it now, that you want to change it, that's what matters. How do I change? How do I become a man you hoped I would be instead of the man I became? You start by remembering that every person you meet has a story. The janitor cleaning your office building might be working 3 jobs to support his family. The waitress serving your coffee might be putting herself through college. The maid at your charity gala might be the mother who gave you life. Dominic winced at the reference to that night, but Harriet continued gently. You start by treating people with the same kindness you wish someone had shown me when I was 17 and scared and alone. You start by using your success to lift others up instead of making yourself feel powerful. I want to do better. I want to be better. Then you will be. Harriet's confidence in him was absolute, because underneath all that anger and success and fear, you're still the baby I held for 3 hours. You're still the child I sang to every night. You're still my Samuel, and Samuel was born with a good heart. As the night wore on, they filled in the gaps of 30 years. Dominic learned that his love of jazz music came from Harriet's father, who had played trumpet in New Orleans clubs during the 1940s. Harriet discovered that Dominic's habit of humming while he worked was something she did too, a genetic quirk that had somehow survived their separation. There's something else, Harriet said as the first light of dawn began creeping through the study windows. Something I need you to know about your biological father. Dominic had been wondering about this all night, but hadn't wanted to ask. What about him? His name was Marcus Thompson. He was 19, worked at the lumber mill, and he was kind to me right up until the moment I told him about you. Then he disappeared. Harriet's voice carried old pain, but no bitterness. I was angry at him for years, but I eventually realized he was just a scared boy who didn't know how to handle responsibility. Do you know what happened to him? He died in Vietnam in 1968. I found out years later when I was trying to trace him. He never married, never had other children. In his personal effects, they found a letter he'd started writing to me, but never sent. He said he was sorry for leaving, and that he hoped both you and I were doing well. The weight of this revelation settled over both of them. Dominic's father had been another casualty of circumstances, another young person faced with impossible choices in an unforgiving world. "I'm sorry you never got to know him," Harriet said. "He wasn't a bad person, just young and scared. Like you were. Like I was." They sat in comfortable silence as New Orleans woke up around them. Two people who had found each other across 3 decades of longing and loss. The truth hadn't erased the years of separation, but had transformed them from a wound into a bridge. "What happens now?" Dominic asked. "Now we start building the relationship we should have had all along," Harriet replied. "If you want that." "I want that more than I've ever wanted anything in my life." For the first time in 30 years, mother and son were home. The Monday morning after their reunion, Dominic Langston walked into his corporate headquarters like a man carrying a different soul inside the same body. His employees noticed a change immediately. Something softer in his eyes, something more thoughtful in his stride. The demanding billionaire who had terrified assistants and intimidated business rivals had been replaced by someone who actually saw the people around him. His first order of business wasn't a board meeting or a conference call. It was finding every staff member who had worked at his charity gala. "I need you to locate the catering company we used last Friday," he told his assistant Margaret. "And I need contact information for every person who worked the event. Every server, every cleaner, everyone." Margaret looked confused, but nodded. "Of course, Mr. Langston. May I ask why?" "Because I owe them all an apology." By Wednesday, Dominic had personally called each of the 23 staff members who had witnessed his cruel treatment of Harriet. To each one, he offered the same message. "I behaved unacceptably that night. My anger was misdirected, and my treatment of Ms. Boone was wrong. I want to apologize to you for making you witness that. And I want you to know that such behavior will never happen in my presence again." Most were shocked by the calls. Several were moved to tears. All of them spread the word that something fundamental had shifted in one of New Orleans' most powerful men. But Dominic's transformation went far deeper than apologies. On Thursday morning, he called an emergency meeting with his entire corporate leadership team. These were the people who ran his billion-dollar empire, who made decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of customers. "I want to talk about how we treat people," he began, his voice carrying a gravity that commanded immediate attention. "Not just our clients or our partners, but everyone who comes into contact with our company. The cleaning crews who work our offices at night, the food service workers in our cafeteria, the security guards who protect our buildings. Every single person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." His CFO, James Morrison, shifted uncomfortably. "Dom, that's admirable, but what prompted this?" "I learned something about myself last week that I didn't like. I learned that success without humanity is just expensive emptiness." Dominic looked around the conference table at faces that had never seen him vulnerable before. "I want us to implement new policies immediately. Every employee, from executives to janitors, gets the same quality health insurance. Every worker gets paid sick leave. Every person who works for us gets treated like their contribution matters, because it does." The room was silent as his leadership team processed this dramatic shift in corporate philosophy. "Furthermore," Dominic continued, "I'm establishing the Harriet Boone Foundation for single mothers. We're going to provide educational scholarships, job training, child care assistance, and housing support for women who are trying to build better lives for themselves and their children." "Harriet Boone?" asked as head of public relations. "Who is she?" "She's someone who taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by their job title or their bank account. It's measured by their character, their resilience, and their capacity for love." That evening, Dominic drove to Harriet's small apartment in the Marigny neighborhood, bringing groceries and a proposition that would change both their lives. "I want you to move into the mansion," he said as they sat in her tiny living room, surrounded by 30 years of her quiet, dignified life. "Oh, Samuel, that's sweet, but I couldn't." Not as my housekeeper, he interrupted. As my mother, as the woman who gave me life, and then spent 30 years hoping I'd become someone worthy of the sacrifice she made. Harriet's eyes filled with tears. I have my own life here, my own independence. Keep your independence. Keep your friends. Keep whatever makes you happy. But let me give you the comfort and security you deserve. Let me take care of you the way you would have taken care of me if circumstances had been different. They spent hours talking about what this arrangement would look like. Harriet would have her own wing of the mansion, her own space, her own autonomy. She would continue working if she wanted to, but only because she chose to, not because she had to. I have one condition, she said finally. Anything. I want to keep working with the catering company sometimes. Not because I need the money, but because I've made friends there. These women have become like family to me, and I don't want to abandon them just because my life changed. Dominic smiled, the first genuine smile he'd allowed himself in years. Then we'll make sure everyone in your catering family has better working conditions and fair wages. We'll make sure they have the same opportunities you should have had. Within 2 weeks, Harriet had moved into the Garden District mansion, but more than their living situation had changed. They were building the relationship they should have had all along. Dominic learned that his mother was funny, whip-smart, and possessed of a quiet wisdom that came from surviving decades of hardship with grace. Harriet discovered that her son, beneath all the business armor, was still the curious, thoughtful child she'd held for 3 hours. They established morning routines. Coffee on the veranda, while Harriet told stories about his grandfather's jazz trumpet or his great-grandmother's garden in rural Louisiana. Evenings were spent planning the foundation's programs, with Harriet's insights into the struggles of working mothers guiding every decision. You know what these women need most? She told him one evening as they reviewed scholarship applications. They need someone to believe in them. They need someone to see their potential instead of just their circumstances. The way you saw potential in me when I was just a scared baby, the way I still see potential in you every day. The transformation rippled through every aspect of Dominic's life. His business meetings became more collaborative, less dominated by his intimidating presence. His employees began approaching him with ideas instead of cowering from his demands. His public appearances carried a warmth that hadn't existed before. But perhaps the most significant change was how he saw the city around him. New Orleans had always been his territory to conquer, a place to build his empire and display his success. Now it became a community where every face held a story, where every worker deserved respect, where every mother struggling to provide for her children deserved support and opportunity. He started visiting the foundation's programs personally, not for photo opportunities or tax benefits, but because he genuinely cared about the outcomes. He met single mothers who reminded him of Harriet at 17, women facing impossible choices with courage he was still learning to recognize. Mr. Langston, said Maria Santos, a 22-year-old woman attending nursing school through the Foundation's scholarship program. I don't know how to thank you for this opportunity. You thank me by succeeding, Dominic replied. You thank me by proving that when someone believes in your potential, you can achieve anything. The story of Dominic and Harriet's reunion eventually became public knowledge, not through media exposure they sought, but because transformation that genuine couldn't be hidden. Business journals wrote about the new Dominic Langston and his radically different approach to corporate leadership. Philanthropy magazines featured the Harriet Boone Foundation as a model for meaningful social impact. But the most important changes happened in private moments. When Dominic came home from work to find his mother humming in the kitchen, when Harriet watched her son treat service workers with the same respect he showed board members, when they sat together in the evenings and marveled at how love had found a way to heal 30 years of separation. Do you ever regret it? Dominic asked her one night, giving me up? I regret that we lost 30 years, Harriet replied. But I don't regret the choice I made. That choice gave you opportunities that led you to become the man sitting here with me tonight. That choice and all the pain that came with it brought us to this moment. I love you, Mom, he said. The first time he'd used that word since he was 4 years old. I love you too, my Samuel. I always have. The boy who had been abandoned by the world had finally found his way home. And in doing so, he'd learned that home isn't a place. It's the people who love you unconditionally and the person you become when you love them back. 1 year later, the same mansion in the Garden District that had witnessed cruelty and heartbreak was transformed into a place of celebration and hope. But this wasn't another charity gala for New Orleans elite. This was something entirely different. A community celebration bringing together people from every corner of the city, from every walk of life, united by stories of resilience, family, and second chances. The Stories of Home annual celebration had become Dominic and Harriet's way of honoring not just their reunion, but every family that found its way back together against impossible odds. The mansion's grand ballroom, which had once echoed with the sound of breaking crystal and harsh words, now filled with laughter, music, and the voices of people sharing their most treasured memories. Harriet stood at the center of it all, no longer invisible, no longer forgotten. At 69, she had become the heart of a foundation that had already changed hundreds of lives. Tonight, she wore a beautiful blue dress that Dominic had chosen for her, but more importantly, she wore the radiant smile of a woman who had never stopped believing in love's power to heal. Ladies and gentlemen, Dominic's voice carried across the room as the evening's program began. A year ago, I stood in this very room and made one of the worst mistakes of my life. I let anger and arrogance blind me to the humanity of someone I should have cherished. Tonight, I want to tell you about the woman who taught me that it's never too late to change, never too late to choose love over pride. He gestured toward Harriet, who joined him at the front of the room to thunderous applause. This is Harriet Boone, my mother, my teacher, and the strongest person I've ever known. But she's also something else. She's proof that the most important people in our lives might be hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to truly see them. The crowd included an extraordinary mix of people. Maria Santos was there, now a registered nurse working at Children's Hospital, her 2-year-old daughter playing at her feet. James from the catering company stood next to state senators. Former foster children who had benefited from the foundation's programs mingled with business leaders who had implemented Dominic's new model of corporate responsibility. But the most moving moment came when Dominic invited other reunion stories to be shared. Robert Chun, a 70-year-old man who had found his sister after 50 years of separation following their adoption into different families, spoke about the power of never giving up hope. Lisa Williams told the crowd about discovering that her daughter, given up for adoption at birth, had become a teacher in the same school district where Lisa worked as a janitor. Each story carried the same message. Love finds a way. Family transcends blood, and the most profound connections often happen when we least expect them. But here's what I've learned this year, Dominic continued, his arm around his mother's shoulders. Finding each other was just the beginning. The real miracle has been building the relationship we were meant to have, creating new memories to go alongside the ones we lost. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes finding faces he now knew by name. The security guards from his office building, the cleaning staff who worked his corporate headquarters, the servers who had witnessed his transformation from cruel employer to caring human being. This year taught me that success means nothing if it doesn't include compassion. Wealth is worthless if it doesn't serve others. Power is pointless if it doesn't protect the vulnerable. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. Every person in this room has a story. Every person you meet tomorrow has struggles you can't see and dreams you can't imagine. The difference between being truly successful and just being rich is whether you choose to see those stories. Harriet stepped forward to speak, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had survived everything life could throw at her and emerged with grace and tact. 30 years ago, I made the hardest decision of my life. I gave up my baby because I believed he deserved better than I could provide. For 3 decades, I wondered if I had made the right choice. Now I know it wasn't about right or wrong. It was about love choosing sacrifice over selfishness. Her eyes found her son's face, seeing not the billionaire the world knew, but the 3-hour-old baby she had held and sung to all those years ago. But here's what I want everyone to understand. The story didn't end with separation. Love doesn't give up, even when everything seems hopeless. Samuel found his way back to me not because of money or power, but because we both never stopped believing that family means something deeper than circumstance. As the evening continued, people shared their own stories of loss and reunion, of forgiveness and redemption, of discovering that the people who matter most might be closer than they ever imagined. The mansion filled with tears and laughter, with music and memories, with the sound of a community celebrating the power of human connection. Near midnight, as the last guests were leaving, Dominic and Harriet stood together on a veranda where they now shared coffee every morning. The city lights of New Orleans sparkle beyond the oak trees, and somewhere in that maze of streets and neighborhoods were countless other stories waiting to unfold. Do you think we made a difference? Dominic asked. Oh, my darling boy, Harriet replied, using the endearment she had whispered to him when he was 3 hours old. We've made all the difference, not just each other, but to every person who heard our story and remembered to look closer at the people around them. The truth is, miracles happen every day. They happen when a mother never stops hoping. They happen when a son learns to see beyond his own pain. They happen when strangers become family, when cruelty transforms into kindness, when love proves stronger than time itself. This story proves that miracles happen when we open our hearts to truth. Subscribe to Soul Igniting Stories for more real-life, inspired tales that will restore your faith in love, family, and second chances. And remember, look around you today. You never know whose story might change your life forever. The maid who serves your coffee might be someone's long-lost daughter. The janitor cleaning your office might be a father searching for his son. The person you're tempted to overlook might be exactly who you've been looking for your entire life. Love finds a way. It always has. It always will. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this extraordinary story here on Soul Igniting Story. I truly appreciate you for taking the time to be with us, to open your heart, and to let these words spark something within your soul. Every story we share is crafted to inspire, to uplift, and to remind us all that love, hope, and resilience are alive in every corner of the world. If this story touched you, made you smile, or even brought a little spark of wonder to your day, I would be so grateful if you could show your support. Please give this video a like. It helps more souls discover these stories. Don't forget to leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, feelings, or even your own experiences connected to the story. Your words make this community come alive. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next beautiful journey we'll be sharing together. Until next time, thank you again for being part of the Soul Igniting Story family, where every story lights a flame within.